The UN Security Council is to hold a special session to discuss the protests that began in Iran late last month and were met with a brutal crackdown. The session was requested by the Trump administration, with the U.S. president saying he has been assured that the killing in Iran had stopped. The security alert level at the U.S. air base in Qatar has been lowered, indicating that Washington is stepping back from military action against Tehran for now. On Wednesday, the U.S. withdrew aircraft from its Al-Udeid Air Force Base after Iran said it was prepared to strike U.S. military targets if attacked by the U.S. Iran security authorities have killed at least 3,400 protesters, according to the Norwegian-based NGO Iran Human Rights. The regime in Tehran has struggled to get control of the protest and has been trying to spread its version of events.
These are the images the Islamic Republic wants the world to see. Crowds of people out on the streets of Tehran, mourning security forces allegedly killed by violent protesters, and blaming foreign powers for it.
Our people don't shoot their fellow citizens. That's a foreign way of thinking. That's the US and Israeli way of thinking. They should be identified by the Iranian intelligence services and be given the death penalty.
While most Iranians are still cut off from the world, these people are able to make their voices heard in what experts say is a playbook example of the regime's propaganda.
These images of the funerals, where you have many clerics standing, are there to show Iranians that this is the authentic pious Muslim Shia Iranian society that is mourning. I think it's a minority, and it's a shrinking minority. But of course, you have families that are traditionally and also economically allied with the regime, with its institutions, with the Revolutionary Guard. It's probably 10% of the population, but it's very, very difficult to say.
A shrinking minority of supporters and a powerful security apparatus brutally cracking down on the majority. The Islamic Republic appears to have managed to suppress the protests once again, for now. However, experts point to one factor that could change the equation.
If Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei dies a natural death or is assassinated by the United States in an airstrike or something similar, then we could potentially expect an infighting, which in turn would undermine the ability of the regime to react in a coherent way against the protesters and various sections of society which are waiting, for the opportune moment to rise against the regime.
For now, the blackout keeps much of Iran's reality out of view. But when it ends, the world will get to see more of what the regime is trying to hide.
Raha Bahreini is a human rights lawyer and Iran researcher at Amnesty International, and she's been gathering eyewitness accounts of the regime's response to the protests.
Over the past week, we have been investigating the mass unlawful killings that the Iranian authorities have committed on an unprecedented scale since the 8th of January. These massacres of protesters have taken place while the authorities imposed an internet shutdown to hide their crimes. This internet blackout, which is now in its 7th day, has impeded the ability of victims and eyewitnesses to communicate with the outside world. However, we have still managed to verify dozens of videos and access the eyewitness accounts of journalists, medical workers, victims' relatives, and protesters. Our information and evidence reveals a horrific picture. Security forces have relentlessly fired at protesters, often targeting them in their head and chest. Hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured. Distressed families are searching for missing loved ones among body bags in overflowing morgues. We have received the accounts of eyewitnesses who have seen bodies piled up in pickup trucks, warehouses, and freight containers. The Iranian authorities have once again turned to mass unlawful killings to crush dissent, to eradicate demands for fundamental change, and to silence protesters who want human rights, freedom, and dignity. Protesters who have been repeatedly demanding the downfall of the Islamic Republic and transition to a new system of government that would respect their freedoms and human rights. This policy of bloodshed is driven by systemic impunity of authorities who resort to unlawful use of lethal force to crush protests. As we speak, we are receiving reports that the authorities have created a militarized climate across the country. State agents armed with rifles and pickup trucks on top of which machine guns are mounted are patrolling the streets. The authorities are trying to force people to stay indoors, but this spiral of bloodshed and this impunity for serious crimes under international law must not be allowed to continue. The international community has a duty to protect protesters from further bloodshed.
Although tensions between the U.S. and Iran appear to have been lowered, countries in the region remain on high alert. According to reports, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Egypt managed to convince U.S. President Donald Trump not to strike Iran. It's anyone's guess at this point how long that agreement will hold. Besides U.S. military bases, Tehran had also threatened to retaliate against Israel if the U.S. struck first.
Security concerns.
And I'm joined now by Madawi Al-Rasheed. She's a professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science Middle East Center and a writer based in London. Welcome to DW. Now, how did these 4 Arab states manage to persuade Donald Trump not to strike in Iran?
Well, I mean, the report is based on an anonymous source. I'm not sure that Trump needed convincing by the countries that you have mentioned. I think his advisors and the situation in Iran, the capabilities of the Iranian regime are the deterrent. And obviously these countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, have their own worries. Remember, I mean, only a drone could be launched from Iran to reach Saudi oil fields in the eastern province, which had happened before. Also, the American bases are scattered in the region from Bahrain to Kuwait to Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Oman. All of them host American armed personnel and equipment. Also, there is the danger of the flux of refugees to these countries. Probably that will also include Iraq, which shares a very long border with Iran. Therefore, any kind of military action against Iran is unpredictable. The outcome will not be known unless it is happening. And therefore, these countries worry. What they're worried about is they themselves become caught up in the fire between the Iranian regime and the American forces in the region. Mm-hmm. And this has happened before. Iran has already mentioned and announced that it will retaliate not only against military bases, but also against Israel, which it had done before in a successful way.
And they also reportedly negotiated with the Iranian regime, of course. What concessions do you think they were willing to make there?
Well, the Arab countries have always assured Iran during the last 2 years that they will not allow their airspace or the military bases of the Americans that are on their soil to be used to launch a war against Iran. This is the official narrative, but of course they cannot prevent any kind of action by the Americans who are based in these countries. And also they may not need to launch attacks on Iran from these territorial bases. They could move their aircraft carriers and carry out the attacks. And therefore these countries are caught up in the problem that has arisen as a result of the uprising in Iran and the threats that the Americans have repeatedly announced that they are ready to use military force as one option among others.
If they were so keen to de-escalate, why wait until what seemed to be the 11th hour?
They probably have their diplomacy going, and it is really like, what they are trying to do is give more importance to themselves than they actually deserve or have in Washington. Remember, these are small countries, although they have enormous resources, but they are very subservient to the U.S., and they are dependent on the U.S. for their security. So they have a lot to lose, but it is not like straightforward that they just pick up the phone and call Trump and say to him, oh, please don't do it, and he's going to do it. This is a very, very superficial way of looking at it, and the way they announce it is basically to give a message to Iran that they are doing their best to prevent a military strike against Iran by the US in order to protect themselves. So there is that kind of propaganda side to it, but it is very unlikely that they are the only countries that Trump would listen to. In fact, he would listen to his own instincts, would not really care that much about the consequences if he could avoid Americans being hurt by this attack.
Madawi Al-Rasheed of LSE, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The tensions between the US and Iran appear to have been lowered for now. Countries in the region are still on high alert. According to reports, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Oman managed to convince Donald Trump not to strike Iran. Besides US military bases, Tehran had also threatened to retaliate against Israel if the US struck first. Let's get more from our correspondent, Emily Gordine in Tel Aviv. Welcome, Emily. How concerned are Israelis about the prospects of the US attacking Iran?
Well, Israelis by and large are fairly relaxed at this point. Activity here at the beach is slowly winding down, but Israelis are generally going about their day as normally. And during the day, earlier, you would see people having fun at the beach. They would be going to work, going to school without any restrictions. But of course, the developments in Iran have been at the top of the news in Israel too. People have been following the developments very carefully with the question in mind what a US strike on Iran could mean for them. The 12-day war with Iran of the summer last year is still very fresh on people's minds. And looking ahead, they're looking ahead with mixed feelings between sympathy for the Iranians, defiance, but also concern. I spoke to people earlier. Let's hear from them directly.
We're prepared for anything. We trust our government, our army, and our security people. We believe everything is going to be okay. We're a strong nation. We're not afraid of anything.
I'm a bit worried because Iran and Israel have not a great history. And I see what happened in Iran, and it's really, it's make me sad, and I feel like I feel them, and I want them to be in a better place with a freedom, and I hope it will be.
I have a shelter at home, thank God. We feel safe, but our experience with the last round of rockets shown that it's difficult, because even with the shelters at home, you're not protected. We saw what happened in Beersheba.
So the thoughts of some Israelis there, Emily. What's the government saying and indeed doing?
Well, the Israeli government has in the past been quite hawkish about a second round of attacks on Iran. Reports suggest that during Netanyahu's last visit to the US in late December last year, he is said to have brought it up with US President Donald Trump. Now the Israeli government is keeping a fairly low profile there. Fairly quiet on their goals when it comes to Iran. They're letting the US handle this situation. No restrictions have been set for the population yet. That being said, the Israeli security establishment, of course, is making preparations for an event that Iran could retaliate against Israel in response to a US attack. The Israelis are working with two scenarios here. One is a limited US attack on Iran, which would likely be a surprise attack with very little pre-warning. And the second scenario is a more extensive US strikes on Iran with the intent of toppling the regime. Now, depending on the scenarios, they would have different implications for the Israelis, but generally speaking, at this point, the Israeli security establishment doesn't necessarily see Israel as the immediate first target of the Iranians in the event of a retaliation to US strikes. So they are staying calm. They're making preparations in the case of, possible strikes or drone attacks or cyber attacks. But generally speaking, they're keeping a low profile and things are fairly calm at this point.
Thanks, Emily. Emily Gordine in Tel Aviv.